Welcome back, everyone. We hope you're well fed and well rested because it's time for tennis. Not just tennis, folks. Grand Slam tennis, the last Grand Slam of the year. As we approach this point in the tennis calendar, how are you feeling, Candace? How's the season been? Where do you feel like we are? Does it feel like this snuck up on you? Does it feel like it took forever? How's it going?
It kind of feels like it snuck up on me, maybe just because this was kind of a more traditional summer compared to last year, and tossed the Olympics into there as well. So it's been a lot of big tennis, and so it feels like it snuck up on me in that way. But it's interesting because it's the story that we've had for quite some time, but maybe more so than ever now. That I feel like I look at the women's portion of the tournament, and I'm very excited at the possibilities from a betting perspective, and I look at the men and not as excited. Maybe excited to watch, but maybe not as excited to bet.
I wonder if that's a theme. It feels like something I've heard before somewhere from someone. Anyway, Steve, how are you feeling? I know that it's been an up and down tennis year for you. Again, we're at the last Grand Slam. Did this sneak up on you? Were you ready for it? How are we feeling? How's it going?
Yeah, good. Another Grand Slam in lockdown here in Victoria. So good fun. No, it's been good. I think obviously it's been nice to actually have tennis consistently across the course of the year, which we couldn't really say about 2020. So looking forward to seeing what the last Grand Slam of the year has in store for us.
Indeed. Let's jump in. We'll start with the men's side, which, we have less parity here. We'll be perfectly honest about this, but there's a lot of good players. We do love the 5-set tennis. I don't know if anybody wants to take this opportunity to make fun of Ben Rothenberger. That's enough. Maybe we feel bad for him given about some of the other stuff that's going on. But let's not talk about all that. Novak Djokovic is our top seed after taking a break, talking about how he needed some time to rest and kind of get himself ready for this. Missed a couple big events. As you start to look down, though, it's really tough to find someone here, in my opinion, that could really have a solid chance of beating him. You see Matteo Berrettini at the bottom there, but he's out of form. I'm not sure he's 100% healthy. Maybe someone like Karatsev could kind of dig deep and find the form that he had earlier in the year. But as you look at this quarter, Candace, can you see anybody but Novak beating Novak?
Nope, I can't. I think that he has a fairly kind quarter. To be perfectly frank with you, there are some other portions of the draw that are a little bit more loaded. It's kind of that straightforward. You just look in there and you just see that it's players who he's beaten so often. And maybe that's the problem from a betting perspective, is he does beat so many players so often. And so it's hard to see them beating him unless he were to play a tremendously subpar match. I do think the bottom portion of this quarter is a little bit more interesting. Not from an outright perspective, I'm going to give that quarter to Djokovic, but if you were looking in here at a player who could make a little bit of a run and maybe you could make a touch of money off of, I'd be looking over to Hurkacz. Obviously, we know he plays well on this side of the pond, and I think he has a draw that from a betting perspective is interesting, in that you have players that would not be big underdogs against him, and a couple later on in the draw, someone like a Berrettini, who obviously would be favored, but players where you can get some decent odds, I think, moving forward with him. But they're players that he's beaten before and should be comfortable against, like a Gerasimov, maybe a Fucsovics or a Lorenzo Sonego, somebody of that nature. So I like him maybe to kind of string a couple of matches together and try to work something with that from a betting perspective. But other than that, it's a quarter that for me, it's hard to find much value.
Yeah, I like what you said. I have Hurkacz there in the quarterfinal as well. What do you think here, Stephen? Anything to add besides, Djokovic is pretty good unless he's not?
I think here the only person in this quarter that is you could be confident in terms of beating Novak Djokovic is Djokovic himself. I think he's obviously going for the 4th slam of the year. It's going to be a big fortnight for him, but I just don't see any names here. He's basically been put in an 8th here with 3 players who are either out of form or coming back from injury. And there's no one else in there, I think, that's really going to be a genuine threat over the best of 5. Nishikori could maybe, hold with him for a couple of games, but we saw in Tokyo that wasn't enough. And, Struff seems to end up next to Novak in basically every or a number of Grand Slams recently, and has never seemed to really be able to provide a lot of pressure. So look, it is hard to make a case for anyone except maybe Berrettini if he can start to put together some decent tennis and serve big in a potential matchup. But you have to think if he couldn't really beat him, I think in those conditions in Wimbledon, as we saw, obviously the final brought some nerves with it, but it's going to be hard to see anyone out of this section challenging Novak. But I must say, looking at this draw, it was nice to wake up Friday morning and not have to deal with complaints around Novak getting a better draw than Federer and Nadal. So it's nice to see. I mean, he did get an easy draw, but it was nice to have a little bit less anger, I think, through social media.
I like it. Some cautious optimism from our tennis Eeyore here. I do like the optimism in the chat, though. Dark Sage here, he's saying Novak's going to lose in the second round. I'm not sure if that's to Griekspoor or Struff, but I'd like that. That's a bold prediction, sir. And if you're right, you're certainly going to make quite a bit of money off that. Any other thing to add here before we jump into the second quarter, which I think is actually one of the more interesting quarters of either draw?
No, I don't have anything else to add, except I'm curious to see which qualifier ends up there next to Novak in the first round.
We shall see. Second quarter of the draw. Alexander Zverev there at the top, playing very good tennis, dealing with a lot of non-tennis related things for the second time in his career. And the first time stumbled a little bit there and was distracted. Again, not sure if either one of you have any opinions that you really want to share about that. I will say that it is going to be a distraction. That's really all I care to say about that. You see Shapovalov at the bottom here, Khachanov. You look at Riley Opelka, who's kind of a big number here to come out of this quarter. Even somebody like Lorenzo Musetti, Pablo Carreno Busta lurking there with a nice draw, looking to repeat his success on hard courts in general, especially here. He's had some nice runs. We also have Yannick Sinner. So, a lot of names kind of floating around in here. I'll start with you this time, Steve. What do you see here in the second quarter?
Yeah, I think if you look at the recent form of Alexander Zverev, it's very hard to, I guess, make a case against him, particularly through the first week. But, as you said, there's a bit of off-court stuff going on. So it is going to be interesting to see how he kind of handles Sam Querrey first up. But as you scroll kind of through this list of names, Monfils and Bublik I don't think are going to be genuine threats to him across best of five. Yannick Sinner, you could maybe make a case for, has beaten Zverev in the past and has looked good in a handful of tournaments, I think, in North America this year. So he'll be one to keep an eye on, and I'll be interested to see how he goes round one against Max Purcell there. But I think if he gets through that, he should be making his way through to the last 16 at least. Looking to the bottom half of this section, I think Riley Opelka is a name that does stand out there. If he serves well, it's going to be really hard to beat. And I think the other one is probably Karen Khachanov. I think looking through his recent form, he's starting to find a little bit more consistency and looking through that patch there. I think if you look at Shapovalov, it's up and down form. Yes, he went deep at Wimbledon, but he's struggled through the last couple of weeks. And him and a couple of other players who have had a little bit more success in recent months look like they're starting to run out of gas a little bit, if not physically, at least mentally.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. What do you have to say here, Candace?
Not too much that's different. What I was going to say is that I felt like this section was very formful on paper, minus Shapovalov. I have him losing to Khachanov there. That was kind of a match that I had targeted in this section. It pains me to say it, but I've been really disappointed overall with Shapovalov this season. I think I thought we were going to see him take more of a step forward, and then I thought he'd become more consistent, right? He's always had the shot-making ability. We know that how he can be when he gets very aggressive. He can play just brilliant tennis, but I was hoping we'd see a little bit more consistent version of him this year, and it just hasn't happened, at least not yet. And so I'm not sold on him in this tournament to go very far at all. So I would take Khachanov against him. Aside from that, for me, it's very, very formful.
Yeah, it's one of another value bet that I like that I'm not going to talk about later. Again, PCB there, he's right around 8-1 to win this quarter. I like where he is. Again, unless Opelka kind of runs into him as serving well, or somebody like Khachanov or Shapovalov really catches fire and is in nice form. I think he's going to be sitting there in the quarterfinals, and I'll be well ahead of whatever number he is there against Zverev or Sinner like that. But in general, I think one of the themes I think of this kind of next couple of weeks and these draws in general, given how late it is in the season, some of the injury withdrawals, some of the COVID withdrawals, what we have here is a lot of big names, a lot of the very best players, but the fields are a little thinner at some of these spots than I think they were at some of the earlier slams. So I think we'll start to see a little more certainty in the first rounds, but I'm curious to see kind of what happens round 4 and later. But this quarter should be fun. Curious to see who gets the chance to probably lose to Novak Djokovic. I mean, I guess I'll ask that question. Can anybody here beat Novak Djokovic, guys?
Nope.
I want to say Zverev, but I feel like he may have done his dash, I think, by winning in Tokyo. And best of five's a completely different game. So he'd need to be, I think Zverev would need to get through this quarter and barely drop a set. I think he'd need to be in really good shape, I think, if he were to, meet Novak in a semi.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want him to come through that drop in a set, maybe kind of have one tough match along the way and then kind of, come in comfortable. But I think you're right. If you're picking anybody, honestly, and not quite anybody in the draw, but he's one of the few names I think you can pick anywhere. But if we had to pick somebody, it's him. But I agree, it's probably Djokovic here that'll be in the final. So let's jump into the third quarter and try to figure out who might be playing him in that final. Andrei Rublev playing some nice tennis, finished second in Cincinnati. Our seed up top. Stefanos Tsitsipas down at the bottom. Continues to struggle and kind of play confusing tennis, for lack of a better way of understanding what's happened since the French Open collapse. Some other fun names here in the middle. We'll see what Humbert can do. Guerin, I believe, has had some success here. Felix is always a lot of fun. RBA has played well here before, but generally struggling. What do you see here, Candace?
Yeah, you named a couple of players of interest. I'd say Felix first and foremost. We don't know who the qualifier is going to be, but potentially someone like Feliciano Lopez second round, which again older, but obviously the right style of play for this tournament. RBA in there as well, and then potentially Rublev. And so it's not an easy draw by any means for Felix, but it's a draw, or at least the qualifier aside, the men in the early rounds he's had some success against. And even Rublev, he's taken him close on a couple of occasions, enough that if that match were to formalize, I'd anticipate Felix would be a betting prospect in there. Obviously, you've got to get there, but it is something I'm keeping my eye on moving forward throughout the course of the tournament. Aside from that, there's not a lot. I mean, again, very, very formful Tsitsipas down at the bottom. It's tough because if you would have told me who would I be looking to beat up the big players in this tournament, I would have said Stefanos Tsitsipas, and yet I just don't see it. At least not in this section. You have Guerin going through potentially a couple of matches. I think Tsitsipas should be able to beat him, especially best of 5. And honestly, I would have Felix beating Rublev. Maybe that's the closest to like a big upset I have here. But then if that happens, that just makes it probably easier for Tsitsipas. So I have Tsitsipas going through this section. Again, really the only kind of slight upset I have in there is maybe Felix making his way through to playing him for the quarter. But that's about it.
How about you, Steve?
I've tossed and turned on this one over the last 24 hours or so. And whilst, I think when I first looked through, I went, oh, well, relatively easy run for Rublev and Tsitsipas should be able to make a little bit of a run. Having had a little bit of a more look at the odds, that just using Bet365 as an example at the moment, you've got Francis Tiafoe and Cam Norrie, who are both $26 to win this quarter, both in different sections of the quarter. And I'm wondering if playing both of them, so getting a 12-1 or $13 spot there for them to win this quarter collectively, one of the two of them, I think isn't the worst play. I think Tiafoe should have depending on which qualifier he gets, will probably decide whether I go down this path. But Payer or Krujinovic in the second round, I think he has the athleticism and the fitness to be able to challenge Rublev in the right conditions, and hopefully, the USTA give him those conditions, playing in his home slam. And if you look to the bottom, I know Tsitsipas, it's the big name of this draw, and when you look at him to win the quarter, he's around that even money or $2.10. But he just hasn't impressed me since Roland Garros. And I think when you go through it, he looks like someone who's on the edge, I think, mentally in terms of his exhaustion and really struggling. You look through a lot of his matches, he's not converting breakpoint chances. He's finding himself in third sets that he just shouldn't be in, I think, at this stage of his career with his form. And I just wonder if you kind of go through that. Murray will be an interesting test first up. Mannarino will be an interesting test up, second up if that were to happen. And I just think looking at it, Cam Norrie maybe in that section can get, maybe the best of Alcaraz coming off a long week. He's still playing tennis this week. I think that might be an interesting spot to, instead of taking Norrie maybe to beat Alcaraz head-to-head, to maybe just jump into him at a bigger price in the quarter market and try and formulate a bit of a portfolio between him and Tiafoe as a couple of upsets. But are you impressed that I got through that entire thing without talking about Nick Kyrgios?
I was a little bummed, but we'll see how that goes. Kyrgios will be kind of interesting. I'm sure he won't last more than a match or two. Maybe he will. I don't know. That'd be kind of fun. For
perspective, his odds to win the quarter are shorter than both Tiafoe and Norrie.
Yeah, that's silly. I don't agree with that, of course. I mean, he could definitely beat RBA. There's going to be a lot of tie breaks in this quarter, but I kind of agree with everything you guys said, but I think it just all builds for Rublev here. I think he's sitting in a really nice spot. I don't see anybody that's really going to challenge him unless, again, Tiafoe gets really hot, RBA finds some form, or Felix suddenly gets really good in best-of-5 tennis. And Tsitsipas is really vulnerable. He is, kind of second favorite to win this quarter, and he was kind of my easy first pick here. So I like this spot for Rublev, and I kind of like his chances here to maybe make a deep run in this tournament. We'll see how it goes. He gets a chance to avoid Djokovic for as long as possible, but that was the name that I had coming out. Any other thoughts on this quarter, guys? We should jump into the fourth and final quarter, where, of course, we have Mr. Medvedev, our seat at the top, Casper Ruud. And again, you start to look through, not too many people here in the middle that can really upset the apple cart. Marin Cilic is always kind of dangerous in best-of-5 tennis, but I think I'm reaching deep for things to talk about here when I'm trying to figure out ways that Medvedev doesn't come through this quarter pretty comfortably. What do you think, Steve?
I tend to agree. And I think in the same way that Novak has ended up next to 3 seeds who are pretty vulnerable in terms of form and fitness, I don't see Cilic, Evans, or Dimitrov causing a lot of worry in the first week. I think when you go through those unseeded names, unless I don't think Gasquet is turning back the clock in round 1, although it would be impressive in warmer conditions. Outside of maybe Kupfer, it's hard to make a case really for anyone there challenging Medvedev over the best-of-5 format. Looking to the top, I actually think you could maybe make a case that the winner of that Nakashima-Isner match is able to make their way through that portion of the draw. I think Ruud's vulnerable. And I think ADF, he played well here last year and gets a qualifier first up. I'd like to have seen a little bit better form from him leading in. But, I wanted to, and I said kind of before this draw came out, I wanted to attack, the Casper Ruud section, but it hasn't been made easy by the draw.
No, it's tough to kind of pick that part apart, if you will. Candice, what do you see?
Very similar, I think, down there with Medvedev. It's going to be incredibly difficult to beat him. I just don't see it with the names that we have surrounding him. That other section in there with Casper Ruud, I had ADF winning a couple of matches. I had him ultimately beating Ruud, but I have Isner making his way through, which it's funny because he's the 19th seed, but it still just feels so boring and obvious. I think that's my difficulty. I mean, I love men's tennis. I love watching. I will be hyped up watching all of these matches, but just going through quarter by quarter for me, I'm somebody who likes to find, bad favorites and work around them. And it was just a tournament that from top to bottom, I really, really struggled to do that.
It is kind of the theme of the tournament, and curious to see that might start to sneak into certain parts of the WTA draw, but we're not there quite yet. Any other thoughts, guys, on this quarter or the draw in general before we jump into some of our picks?
Nothing from me. Shall we jump in?
Ready when you are.
We shall lead off. Let's lead off with Candice. Who is your ace for the tournament?
My ace for the tournament is going to be Medvedev. For me, I think that his portion of the draws we just spoke about and not too shabby. Obviously, opposite side from Djokovic is going to be beneficial anytime as well. So we're going for Medvedev. hopefully he can get him a nice marquee victory here at the U.S. Open.
I like that.
How much do you like it, Alex? Who have you gone for as your ace?
I like it so much I stole it. I'm going to put it in before Candace did. I'm not going to necessarily tell, but I do. I think he's been playing really nice tennis. Yes, he didn't win Cincinnati, but in a way that gave him some time to recover, get here, get comfortable. He is in a really nice spot of the draw. He obviously avoids Djokovic as long as possible, and it's just hard to find anybody kind of in his way who's really going to knock him off. So, as I've said, I think the last couple weeks, it's hard court season. It's Medvedev season.
And I've had to go for someone from the other half, and shock horror, I've gone for Novak.
Just pick the favorite, why don't you?
I really do think at the moment with this tournament for Novak, and I said it, I think, when we talked about that first quarter, is his biggest threat is himself. And it was the same last year. It was his own anger which caused him to hit the linesperson with the ball. It's either himself mentally or physically. And I think we've seen that through a number of US Opens over the years, that he's found himself injured. He hasn't played a lot of tennis. He skipped this entire swing in North America coming in here, which I thought was the right idea after Tokyo, because I think he is good enough to be able to kind of find his way through the first week of Grand Slams at the moment. And I think when you look at it, you look at that quarter, I think my way of approaching this draw is most likely going to be picking Novak from the top half and then finding some longer range prices in the bottom half. And if something happens to Novak, worst case scenario, those prices down the bottom are going to come in significantly with the news of Novak's withdrawal. But I think from the last couple of slams in particular, when I found myself kind of going for Medvedev, going for Tsitsipas, and going for Rublev, because Novak's been so dominant, we're getting to quarterfinals, and all those players are the same prices, if not longer, than they were pre-tournament. So now I've probably made the bad. I've probably timed this really poorly, and something will happen this fortnight. But I think this is probably the spot to start, or at least keep Novak safe. I think if making some plays, and then figure out some trading options around there, maybe in the bottom half.
And that's why we keep talking about kind of people's position in relation to Novak. You want to give them as much time to kind of avoid him.
Yeah, and and that kind of brings in one of my value picks, which is going to be a bit of a tricky value pick because of the difficulty of the first round. But it is Cam Norrie. I think he's showing a really consistent level of tennis, and he's shown himself. He can handle heat relatively well. He can handle humidity well. He can handle best of five relatively well. And I think if he can get Alcaraz coming off this long week that he's playing this week in Winston-Salem, I think there's a potential there to maybe open things up. And I think he could be a genuine challenge for Tsitsipas. I'm not going to be heavily involved in it. I just think he's one piece of a puzzle there in that bottom half that you could start to kind of work out. Like I mentioned, I think before with Tiafoe as well, that there's a couple of names there that if you can think that maybe those first 2 or 3 rounds, they look decent prices, then maybe to kind of form them all together at triple figure odds and see how you end up. Now, Candace, do you have a similar thought around a player? Are you trying to find someone who can make their way through the floor?
Just someone. I'm going to go with Hurkacz. I mentioned him a little bit earlier. When I say Hurkacz parlay, well, this is where we're going to get into the nitty gritty, I suppose. Is basically for me, I'm going to start parlaying him from that first round in, and I'm going to keep an eye on Berrettini. So if Berrettini stays in and keeps going, my goal is to get those two playing each other, and then that's where I'm going to cut it off. Because even if you were to beat Berrettini, likely plays Djokovic, that's probably not going to happen. I'm going to take Hurkacz as long as I can before we get to Djokovic, hoping I can work out a little bit of a parlay here. It's not the cleanest move, I suppose, but it is one I have some confidence in. This is a player who has done well, obviously, in North America before. This is a surface that he's done well over in the past. I like his path, as I mentioned. It's players that are good enough that he's not going to be a just tremendously overwhelming favorite against all of them, but they're also players he's had some success against before. Obviously, we know coming off of Wimbledon, he's had a little bit of a kind of breakthrough, a Grand Slam success, and he's played well against Berrettini in the past. I mean, certainly this is a player that he's been able to beat for in best of 3. Best of 5, a little bit different story, but he's been able to take sets off of him. So that would be enough for me if I can kind of make his way through to that point in the draw, and hopefully we steal a little bit here with a maybe slightly unconventional play.
And I think when you look at that, the only way that probably doesn't work is if Novak gets knocked out in terms of
right.
the
value. Yeah.
When you look at that quarter in that first couple of weeks, then first couple of matches, then it doesn't look like that's something that will unfold, which it all makes sense. Alex, who have you gone for as your value?
Mr. Rublev, I think he is in solid form, finished second in Cincinnati last week. I think one of the important parts was beating Medvedev, even though I don't think Daniel was at his best. Just nice to kind of get that out of the way before you come into this event, given that I think that's the very likely opponent they'll see there in the semifinals. He's 28 to win this event. He's plus 350 or 3.5 to 1 to win his quarter. I like both of those numbers quite a bit. I think his position near Tsitsipas is giving us a little bit of value. Again, would avoid Djokovic as long as possible. We'll see if he can finally kind of beat Medvedev in a Grand Slam. He's beaten him a couple times now in best of 3. Let's see what he can do in best of 5. These should be solid conditions. He's playing good tennis, and I think he should be one of the top 5 favorites, not kind of floating out towards the 10th, 11th spot as he is.
And who do you have as your unforced error?
As my unforced error this week, Mr. Jack Sock. He is a wild card. He was a very highly ranked player. I think he got up to 10, 11, maybe 9, something like that. And then from that point on, has been a very good doubles player. He got to 8. 8 was as high as he got in the world. Made the ATP finals one year. As you start to look back since then, he did win a Little Rock Challenger event, but hasn't really won more than one, if any, of matches in some of these Grand Slam events. He's getting the wild card, I believe, because he's an American and he's notable and stuff, and good for him. So thanks for coming, Jack. Enjoy the doubles, but I think your singles week will be very short.
And I think he's facing Nishioka in the first round, who I think he faced the other week, and Nishioka hurt himself when he was in front. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. My unforced error is, he used to be a favorite of mine, David Goffin. He just hasn't played enough tennis. And when you haven't played a lot of tennis and you look at the outrights and you look at the fact that he's the closest seed to Novak Djokovic, I think I'm just going to watch him this week. There's no investment in any capacity, and it'll be interesting to see kind of what unfolds for him. But hopefully he can kind of, find his way back to a level of fitness and I think motivation that's back close to his best, because at his best, he is one of those, better counterpunching players on tour.
Yeah, hopefully all that stuff hasn't gotten to him by now. That can kind of get in your head after a while. Every time you come out, you have some kind of fluky, terrible injury.
That is for sure. Now, my overvalued player, I'll just jump straight in, is Stefanos Tsitsipas. He looks like a player on court that is at the point of almost burnout in terms of the amount of tennis he's played, and just how, not necessarily uncomfortable, but he just hasn't been able to kind of find that level that he knows he can play. And I think it's reaching that point now with him where it's very, very frustrating. When you look at outrights and you look at what you want from players, you want players that have come in with confidence, with good form, winning confidently early in tournaments, but then finishing off matches from winning positions. And that result against Alexander Zverev in Cincinnati, up a double break in the third set and unable to finish it off, I think that's performances like that, I think that are showing that he's starting to tire, I think, for this year. So I'm happy to go down a different path, I think, here instead of going with him. How about let's go to you, Alex. Who have you gone for?
I agree. I think, you try to say it kind of a nicer way. He just doesn't look right. It's just there's something kind of off. He's really struggled to put together multiple wins, really struggling to win points on return, which is going to be really important in these conditions. It is hard court, but it's a little bit slower here. I don't like where he is in the draw. He's going to be challenged from match 1 all the way through the tournament. So I think at some point, either fatigue, him, whoever he's playing, and kind of the general lack of form he's had will catch up to him. So I think it's kind of silly to have him up as high as he is.
I think I'm still a little bit burnt by him. I think I backed him this time last year, and we ended up with I think was it 2 sets to love up on Chorich, or he was in a very dominant position against Chorich, and it just unfolded or fell away very, very quickly. And I think those type of performances linger in the mind of Tsitsipas longer than others. Candice, who have you gone for as your overvalued player?
I went for everybody. I just don't see it. When you look at the favorites, I think that their odds are too short, especially for a player like Tsitsipas, with respect to their, chance of victory. Maybe Djokovic aside, maybe you can make a case for Djokovic, but he's probably the only one. And then when you start to get past that kind of big four, big five, the odds I was seeing for everybody else, there's not even, what would I say? The gap between them and those top four players is not displayed within the odds as well. They're too close in their disparity with respect to their chance of victory, in my opinion. So to me, from an outright perspective, there wasn't anybody who I thought was value. If you were going to make the case for anybody, it was going to be Djokovic. And I'm just not going to do that with that sort of odds. But he's the only one I think I could really make a case for.
Yep, that seems more than fair. Well, that wraps up the men's, unless there's any other final thoughts from either of you.
Yep.
Nothing for me.
Alrighty, let's jump straight into the women's draw, shall we?
Woo-hoo!
Yeah. Our number 1 seed, Ashley Barty. And as I kind of hinted, there's going to be certain pockets of this draw where I think we're going to ask a lot of similar questions as we did in the last one. And we start here. Who can beat Ashley Barty in this quarter? She has played some fantastic tennis all year across all 3 surfaces. You start to look down here. Karolina Muchova could be competitive, but that's going to be a tough match in the first round. We'd love to talk about Jennifer Brady, but she's got that foot injury, and that's just not a thing you want when you're playing Grand Slam level tennis. We do have a gold medalist here. Jessica Pegula has been very competitive. We'll see how Swiatek can do on these courts, despite not really having a whole lot of success here in the last few weeks. Candice, what do you see here in this first quarter?
Right. The beginning of this tournament, as has been so many WTA tournaments this year, we circle right around Barty, what's going to be happening there. Certainly her first couple of rounds seemed favorable enough. I think if somebody were to beat her decently early in here, it would be Muchova. And I think a lot of that relies on Jennifer Brady's fitness and her foot. If she is fit or seems to be well, then even if Muchova were to beat her and she's had success against her before, you'd expect that to be a very strenuous match, which is the last thing you'd want going into facing Barty. But if Brady were not 100% or maybe even loses before that, if she's struggling with her foot, I do think it opens the door a lot more for Muchova to potentially beat Barty. So it sounds kind of strange that I'm looking for a potential future matchup and I'm going to be watching somebody who's not involved in that matchup as a guide for me, but I do think it makes a really, really big difference as far as where Muchova would be if she were to play against Barty just a few rounds into the tournament. When you go down to the bottom portion of this section, Pegula, obviously, as you mentioned, she really looms large in here. I don't think her draw is terribly difficult in this position. So she should be able to make her way through and put together a couple of matches. I'm also intrigued in here with Kontaveit. I could see her beating Swiatek, especially over this surface. A little bit more of an aggressive player. So I'd be looking to her if her and Swiatek were to meet up. But I think for me, I ultimately had Pegula making it through. I had Muchova beating Barty. So I'm looking for chaos early. You can tell after looking at the men's draw, I was desperate for anything. I wanted something to happen. So I had it Muchova and Pegula, with Pegula making her way through the quarter. I will say, though, I'm very intrigued by a player in the first round, that being the Aussie Storm Sanders. So I'm really interested to hear what our main man Steve has to say about her, because the more I looked into her, the more I was pretty intrigued.
Yeah, we'll see what she can do here. What do you see, Steve? I mean, you can talk about that Australian, the other Australian. I think there's only 2 in here.
I think in this section, well, there's
all kind of tiny.
there are two. Not many made it through qualifying, so unless Astra Sharma finds her way in here as well, we've just got the two there in Sanders and Stoser. And look, I think Sanders has a lot more potential here. I think Stoser is probably one to keep an eye on more so in the doubles more than anything, I think, here.
I think you meant announcing later in the event.
I'm a little bit annoyed at this draw. I think when I was kind of looking at it and prepping for it and going, oh, like I found it exciting that there was the potential, I guess, for Barty and Osaka to end up in the same half, which hasn't eventuated. And when I kind of went through those players kind of, maybe 10 to 32 in terms of the seedings, there are a couple of players I really wanted to keep an eye on where they popped up in the draw. Two of them were Bencic and Pegula, and another unseeded player was Teichmann. And they've all found themselves in the same eighth and all kind of cancelled each other out in terms of value looking at their prices. So I don't see any significant threat yet. It's worth mentioning that tennis made it to the news in Australia yesterday, and that was because Ashley Barty has a challenging first-round match against a former US Open finalist. So we've gone the sample size back many, many years. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But I think when you look through it, like, I feel like if you want to challenge Barty now, I know Sorribes Tormo did it in Tokyo, but that was more Barty errors. It's, can Kudermetova redline for a long period? It's outside of that, it's hard to make a case. I think, maybe Mahova, but I wouldn't be confidently getting involved, I don't think, in too many names here, particularly, on the hards. Swiatek was another one I wanted to keep an eye on, but she's too close to Barty. It's hard to make a case, I think, for anyone. There's a pocket of players in the bottom portion of this quarter that are going to knock each other out, and Barty's only going to have to face one of them.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it. A lot of the women that can really challenge her down in the bottom half, and she just kind of has to play solid tennis until she gets to that point. You do have some talented women up here. I mean, Clara Towson was one of the better younger players on tour, has struggled kind of in the last season to adapt to the better players, and again, still very young. If memory serves me, she's 20, maybe even less than that still. It's amazing how young some of these women are. Kudermetova is very good, but she's not at that level yet. I like what you said about Mahova there, Candace. I think she has a nice shot, either her or Tormo, whoever gets through there. Maybe Brady's foot's okay. Again, I think that's kind of the best chance we have, but I'm not counting on somebody with a foot injury based on, historically what we've seen in all sports with people with feet injuries. So looks pretty solid here for Barty, but I'm going to hope for chaos. I like Candace's optimism. Any other thing to add, guys, before we jump into the second quarter?
I think one of the matches of the first day or two will be Kostaya versus Kudermetova.
That should be a lot of fun.
As well as Mahova Sorribes Tormo, just for the contrast in styles. But moving on to the second quarter here, and look at that familiar name at the top.
Karolina Pliskova, the second-place finisher at Wimbledon. Been playing some nice tennis since then. Has kind of found herself after grass season. Bianca Andreescu down there at the bottom continues to kind of struggle to put it together, but we've seen it happen before. She just kind of snaps into form. Ostapenko, Sakkari, Kvitova are other seeds in here. You see Pavlyuchenkova, Paula Badosa. This is kind of a fun, competitive quarter, but at the same time, also hard for me to pick somebody to win it. Not just because it's competitive. It's hard for me to maybe get excited about any of these names. Was there anybody here that kind of piqued your interest, Steve?
No. In all honesty, probably Andreescu. I think, I'm on Andreescu in the outright markets from a couple of weeks ago. I think it was the lead into the Canadian tournament. I felt it was better to get involved in the US Open and hope that she could, display some decent form in the lead up somewhere. I think the day off between matches here helps her. But I think when you look through that, I think that's probably the main name, I guess, in terms of potential, and also looking forward, I guess, to the potential of, being a genuine challenge, I think, for Barty come the semi-final as well. I have Pliskova on upset alert in round one, and if she wins round one, I'm probably going to have her on upset alert in round two. I think this is a really tricky little spot for her, and it's a couple of tricky opponents. And then at the end of that, there's probably Paula Badosa potentially waiting who looked really good against her before her injury kind of reared its ugly head the other week. So I think it's an interesting pocket of the draw, and I'm really interested and excited to get into a number of these first round matchups in here. But I think if you wanted to look long term through this whole section, Andreescu is probably the intriguing one. If you wanted to get involved in the Sakkari versus Kostyuk match, potentially it's more of a get involved in the outright at a decent price instead of the head-to-head and try and work your way through there, because I think that has the potential to be a great match, and whoever wins that could make a little run and potentially knock off Petra Kvitova. And outside of that, Pavlyuchenkova just got a visa, I think, to get into the United States. So, she's made a mad dash to New York. So, yeah, I think there's upset alert at the top. And looking to the bottom, I think, Andreescu is probably the one that stands out. And then from there, that winner of Kostyuk Sakkari could make a little run to week 2.
Interesting. What do you think, Candace?
Well, I think I agree with quite a bit of what Steve was saying. There's nobody in here that I'm excited about as far as the entire tournament is concerned, or as far as somebody, being a threat to Barty or to getting the victory. But the player that I'm interested in is Kostyuk. And the way that I would play it is very similar to what Steve was describing. I'd be looking to get her just through the quarter and hope you make your way through that. I think you're going to get more value that way than by just playing her straight up against Sakkari. But she's obviously the right type of player against Sakkari. Very, very aggressive. It's going to be all or nothing for her. But I think that's a favorable matchup for her in the beginning if she can make her way through and not be too drained from it. Ironically, maybe it'd be that second round potentially would be the one that would derail her even more if she were to have to face Sevastova again. She's really struggled against her in recent times, but aside from that, it's if she can, obviously it's a big ask to make it past Sakkari first round, but right type of player for her game. So Kostyuk's the one who intrigues me in this section, but there's nobody who intrigues me from here as far as a potential threat for victory is concerned. I looked at that top section with Pliskova against Badosa. So again, very, very formful up top.
Yeah, just a bunch of names. I love you guys touched on just about everybody. I think these are great conditions for Badosa. I don't think Pavlyuchenkova really can do well here. We've seen Kvitova struggle a bunch of times. Again, the heat and humidity is not good for her, let alone kind of the level of tennis she's been playing. Sakkari is someone that I've kind of stepped back away from in terms of thinking she can make deep runs in these events. She continues to struggle after basically round 3 to get past some of these better players. Andreescu, I think, does have a couple matches here that she can kind of navigate, but Golubic could reach a level kind of high enough to serve her way through that match and take advantage of Andreescu's mistakes. We'll see which qualifier gets placed there against Lauren Davis. There is a name down there at the bottom. I'm curious to see what Samsonova can do. She continues to be kind of one of my favorite younger players. I think she kind of found in what can be a tough quarter one of the softer spots. Again, we'll see what qualifier she gets, but the next match will be Ostapenko or Podoroska, two women that are very talented but could honestly just lose that match on their own accord, let alone what Samsonova can actually bring to the table there. Then it's maybe Andreescu, who is either maybe in form, maybe a little tired at this point and kind of out of it, can take advantage there. I like her chances, but again, I could make that case for a bunch of names in here. I've got Pliskova coming through just because I think she is starting to play kind of solid tennis here. And as I look, there are a few people that can beat her. I kind of think it's the winner of her versus Badosa. But again, you could make a lot of cases here, despite the fact that I don't really feel terribly confident about a lot of them. But here we are. Any other thoughts on this quarter, guys?
I think the only thing is I'd be far more interested in getting involved in this quarter if it was on the other half of the draw to Barty.
It is a bummer to have to get through this and then play Barty, probably.
Alrighty, shall we move on to the third quarter? And a very, very nice name that I'm used to avoiding come Grand Slam time at the top there in Alina Svitolina.
Alina Svitolina, Kasatkina, Rybakina, Halep's in here, Kerber, Goff, Putin-Seva, Osaka. Kind of one of those names doesn't really necessarily belong in the group, but I won't say who that is. But a lot of fun names here, but again, just a lot of question marks. There is some more positivity for me here, and a lot of fun little sections. Up at the top, you've got this Svitolina, Vondrousova, Kasatkina section. You look down here at the bottom, you've got golf placed pretty close to Sloane Stephens and Madison Keys with Angelique Kerber up there. We'll see how Halep looks kind of in her return from injury. What do you think, Candace?
Yeah, when I looked at this section, Svitolina's the one that stood out, which that's probably the death of me right there. That's when I know I should close the book. But I think, all the way up until potentially Rybakina, there just isn't a ton there for me to be too worried about with her. If she were to play Rybakina, obviously they've had some close matches back and forth, so that one could potentially go either way. But I'd have her seeing it through, and then if Osaka's there, that's the big question, right? I have her there in my draw off of talent and ability and where you feel like she should be, but feels like everything with Naomi is a little bit of question these days. So in my opinion, if you're Svitolina and there's ever a time to play her, it's probably now. So I went with Svitolina to make her way through this section. I do have her facing Osaka ultimately, but I just can't have the confidence in Osaka right now. I just don't know where her head is at. We know what her game is at her very best, and I just can't, with any sort of certainty, predict that we're going to see that.
I liked everything you said except the Svitolina part. I'm just not there yet. I'm just not ready to trust her yet. Steve already kind of made a joke about that. But what do you think here, Steve? I mean, again, there's a lot of names you could pick here, and that's kind of fun to think that, in Naomi Osaka's quarter, there might be an opportunity. I mean, do you have any thoughts in general on Osaka? I mean, she's looked kind of uncomfortable. She spent a lot of time talking about how she doesn't like being the favorite. She, doesn't like being the hunted, I think is the way she described it. It's not the easiest draw, but not the toughest draw. I mean, what do you think of this quarter?
I mean, everyone likes diverting attention away and then coming through, and it's the big underdog story. And look at that; it's fantastic that she's come back and been able to win. My way of looking at Osaka in this draw and in most Grand Slam draws is, I think she's most vulnerable early. And I think Duskova is actually a really interesting first-round matchup for her. And I was looking at Duskova at around $8 in this matchup and thought that might be intriguing on a hot day in New York just to kick things off for Osaka, off not a lot of tennis. She wasn't great in Tokyo, and she hasn't looked great in a handful of matches that she's played. So I'm actually intrigued there. But I think if she gets through that, she should be through to the fourth round. And, Osaka becomes one of those players that, when you go through form of players in second weeks of Grand Slams, she becomes very, very difficult to beat the further this tournament goes on. I think Chris Davis, not too much of a threat. And I think when you roll through that, the player that I think is probably the biggest threat to her in this section is Angelique Kerber. Whether she gets there or not, I think it's that counterpunching style, left-hander, capable returner in terms of that first shot back in the return. Osaka will need to find a high first serve percentage were she to meet there. When I looked at the top half here, I was originally quite intrigued by Svitolina, but then I saw the names Vondrousova, Kasatkina, and even, Halep or Georgie, both very different styles, but all capable of being a real challenge for Svitolina. So it's hard to make a strong case for Svitolina, but I don't think I'm going to be actively opposing her early. If anything, she's probably putting me off getting involved with a Vondrousova or a Rybakina in this section. So I think I'm probably going to go down the Kerber path here. I think she's in a nice spot there. And, she might not go the whole way, but I think she could make a deep run.
I like Kerber's spot again. That's in kind of what is a tough section. She has found kind of the soft spot. Let some of the Americans beat each other up a little bit down there and take advantage. I like what you said about Osaka. She does probably only get better as this tournament goes on, so we'll see if somebody can knock her out early. But it's just amazing we spent all that time talking on it. I don't think anybody talked about Simona Halep longer than about 2 seconds. It's kind of a bummer. We'll see. I hope she's healthy, but
yeah, I think that's the thing, and I think I touched on it the other week, was that there are two names here that you want to trust and you want to back them. But physically they've just struggled a little bit this year, and that's Victoria Azarenka and Simona Halep, and that's a really tough first round matchup. Georgie's been playing pretty well, So it's another one of those ones. I think whoever gets through that, they could make a little run there through this section, but it's a really, really tough first round. And when you're trying to kind of take these prices, you don't want them to be too challenged in the first round if you can avoid it. But also, is that a US Open final rematch in round one, Madison Keys and Sloane Stephens?
It might be.
Going
I
back
try not to think too long about them. They bum me out now. But Sloane's playing better, so let's hope that continues.
Yeah, that will be an interesting one to watch.
Any other thoughts, guys, on this quarter before we jump into the fourth and final?
Let's do it.
This one pretty interesting. You know, a lot of names here and a lot of names, you know, a few more names to feel optimistic about. You got Krejcikova at the top, Sabalenka at the bottom. Collins is here, but unfortunately carrying an adductor injury. Apparently that's a leg muscle, according to the internet. Steve can tell us all about that. Ons Jabeur here, always good. Elise Mertens should win a couple matches. We might have a Vika Muguruza match there in the third round. A lot of fun things here. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting little section here. Again, it comes back around that. Are you supporting Sabalenka or are you playing around Sabalenka is probably the game that this quarter comes down to in a lot of ways. So for me, and I think one of the biggest changes in this draw over the last, week or so has been Sofia Kenin coming out. It means Krejcikova came in as the 8th seed. I think this is a really good section of the draw here for her. When you look at those matches, through the first 3 rounds, it would take Alexandrova, 1, to win 2 matches to get to that point, but 2 to then probably redline quite significantly to get through Krejcikova. And that allows, a couple of those names further down. You've got Azarenka, Muguruza, Mertens, Jabeur. They've all got the chance to knock each other out before they need to face Krejcikova. So I think it's a really good spot for the Czech here. And looking down the bottom, I do wish that Danielle Collins was in a bit better shape in terms of, that adductor injury. But one of the round 1 matches of the tournament is probably Aryna Sabalenka versus Nina Stojanovic. So I'm curious to see what happens there, but I don't think I can get too involved.
How about you, Candace? What do you see here?
Incredibly similar. I mean, I see Sabs making her way through the bottom section there, but again, my focus went straight to Krejcikova as well. I would love to jump on somebody like Azarenka. I just really can't completely trust her physically. And I think Steve said it perfectly. When you have her and Muguruza in such close quarters to each other, it's advantage Krejcikova because she's going to get one of them, potentially pretty worn down. So I'll be looking to Barbara Krejcikova in this section.
I can dig it. I'm with you guys. My big prediction for this event, Barty Krejcikova 3. It's happening. You go back and look, I think it's since May. Krejcikova has only lost 4 matches, twice to Barty, once to Swiatek, and I can't remember who the third person was, but all four times those people went on to win the tournament. So she either is going to win this event or she's going to lose to whoever wins the event. So whoever beats her, go in, bet her outright live. We're going to play the trend. But I think Krejcikova really is just kind of ascended to another level in that she has these advantages of, A, being really successful in the doubles tour. She's played high-level tennis in pressure situations already, and she comes into this tour with a very different game. She plays tennis differently. It looks different, and I think a lot of that is her experience playing doubles and that confidence. You put all that together, and it just really gives her a lot of advantages, and that's really, I think, why she's kind of ripping through the tour this year. I'm curious to see if certain opponents can adapt, but she just brings a lot of variety and versatility in a game where you don't see a lot of women with plan B, let alone plan C, D, and E. She also has a pretty soft draw here. You start to look through. I like Alexandrova a lot, but I don't think she's won more than 3 matches in a tournament since like 2019. Azarenka and Muguruza will be a really fun third-round match, but the two of them have kind of disappointed. I don't think Krejcikova has any trouble moving through there. And then you look at the bottom. If Sabalenka's in form, and hopefully she was watching what Georgie did last week and saw what is possible when you can be an aggressive player that knows how to turn it down a little bit, how to start to play with some bigger margin when you don't have to be trying to paint lines with leads and chase after points, because there really isn't too many players here that can stop her. I'm curious to see what Jabeur can do, but I think she actually kind of has a tough draw in terms of opponents that aren't really going to be too worried about kind of the junk that she's throwing at them. They're not going to be worried about kind of the way she plays. So I think we do see a Sabalenka-Krejcikova quarterfinal here, but simply because I'm just more confident in what Krejcikova has done, and just, again, the versatility in her game. I think not only can she beat Sabalenka, I'm just more confident she's going to get there. So I've got Krejcikova coming out of this quarter as well.
And I think that's the thing with Krejcikova is I don't think her ceiling in terms of what her best tennis looks like is the best in this section, but I think the trust that I have in her finding a level that is relatively close to that level for long enough across the course of a fortnight is part of the appeal.
Yeah. And it's, kind of as I mentioned, that experience of having played in a bunch of tournaments like this, having to deal with all these situations. She's arguably the best doubles player in the world, let alone how good she's playing at singles at this point. I mean, just a tremendous season for her. And, I hope an interesting path that we see maybe more players take. Spend some time, play some doubles, collect some points and some money that way, build up some experience, and then try to make the switch to singles. I mean, it's worked for her. Siniakova, her doubles partner, the two of them have been really great, has been solid, but obviously she's been the much better player so far.
And look, 6 months ago, Krejcikova said she wasn't good at singles, so things change quickly on the tour.
And how, Timmy? Any other thoughts, guys?
No, let's roll straight into the picks. Do you want to lead us off, Alex, with your ace for the tournament?
My pick to win, as I kind of made clear, I think at this point, Miss Ashley Barty. I do expect this to be a Barty-Krejcikova final. I think Krejcikova can win, but, if I have to pick a winner, as we kind of built up here, Barty has a much easier draw. It's really hard to find anyone that's going to challenge her in her quarter, let alone someone from the second quarter that's going to challenge her in the semifinals. She is going to be a strong favorite, I think, all the way to the finals, and maybe even there, unless it's Sabalenka or Krejcikova or somebody like that against her. Again, maybe Osaka finds some good tennis, but I like Barty. She's got a nice draw, and she's the best player in women's tennis at this point right now. I think it's hard for you to convince me otherwise.
Well, it was only 6 months ago that everyone thought she was the fake, false world number one. So how quickly things can change. Candace, who have you gone for as your ace for the tournament?
I'll just burn it away now. I'm going with Svitolina as my ace for the tournament. There's 0% chance this ends well. Everybody, just send me the messages now because we can get it out of the way. But when I went through the draw, it was just the way that I wound up going. I actually quite like the little pocket she's in. I understand, a couple hard-hitting players there, not too far away from her, but I expect them to have to play against each other, maybe soften each other up there just a touch. And, when you look towards that bottom portion of the draw, Krejcikova was the one who could give her plenty of difficulty and has in the past, but obviously you have to look for that to formalize. And for me, the reason I end up going to Svitolina is it's kind of the opposite reason it felt like we used all year. It was the price. I was drawn to the price, to be perfectly honest. She was sitting at 40. And, maybe that's where we have to kind of reverse our mindset with her. She was someone that for I don't know how many tournaments we said was overvalued in all these tournaments. And, maybe she's just lost enough that, the market is starting to kind of let her go a little bit. Obviously doing very well this week against a caliber of player that she's not going to be facing here, but a little confidence boost, never a bad thing. So it was a pure price play for Svitolina, which that's not something I thought I would say.
So are you thinking maybe this is the Svitolina is the Pliskova of Wimbledon come US Open in terms of that finally out to a nice price and can make a really deep run?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's one of those things where we have to kind of challenge our own mindset because we have certain players that we're so used to always being under the odds. So if you're going to give them to me, then I'm going to take them, and it might be burning my money now, but we'll take them.
If you're going to burn it, you may as well do it. Yeah, you may as well do it at a lower price.
Yeah, torch the money at 40-1, guys, if you're going to do it.
Yeah,
the survivor, the final tennis player. That's how I'm seeing it. I'm just trying to picture how it's going to happen.
And I am still making a final decision. I'm most likely going down the path of Barty as well. But since Alex took that, I've gone down a different path for my ace for the tournament. And it is the 10-1 or $11 bet that is Angelique Kerber to win the third quarter. I think it's a great spot there. I think, as you said, yes, she does have Yastremska first up, but I think, looking at what she's kind of produced since the start of the grass season, yes, she lost to Barty last week, but I don't think that's anything to be too ashamed of. I think she's in a nice little spot here. And as I said, I think she's probably the biggest threat to Osaka in that section as well. So I've gone down and tried to find that. Again, a pretty decent price. You're getting double figure odds for that one. Value-wise, we'll start with Candace. Who have you gone for as your value pick?
Well, I'm going quarter hunting for my value pick as well, and I'm going to be looking to Kostyuk to win the second quarter. I mentioned her when we were talking a little bit about that section in particular, and as I mentioned before, really the only match in there that would very, very much concern me would be if she had to play Sebastova right there in the second round, just because she's recently struggled against her. But other than that, these are winnable matches. Obviously, you'd be looking to what happens with Andreescu, but if you're talking about seeded players, obviously a player that, we don't totally know physically if she's completely there or if she even makes it to that point of the tournament. Ability, of course she does, but physically it's a big question mark. So I think this is a section of the draw you can attack. Big match, obviously, right there off the bat against Sakkari, but I think if you like her against Sakkari, the way to play her is to play her in the quarter. That's what I'm opting to do. I'm seeing her around 28 to win that quarter.
And I'm surprised just looking at those prices as well that she is $28 or 28 to 1. Anisimova 17, Ostapenko 14, Martic 23. So I would say on body of form across 2021, Kostyuk is far and away above all of those. And yes, there is that tricky first round matchup, but there's going to be tricky players here all the way through the quarter. So it certainly looks to be a nice value price there. Now, Alex, who have you gone for as your value pick?
Big number here. I touched on her a little bit earlier. I don't know why Ludmila Samsonova is not getting any respect, but I will continue to bet on her as long as they give me such big numbers. She was as high as 1,000 to 1 to win this tournament, depending on where you looked. I bet her at 1,000 to 1. I bet her at 150 to 1. I would bet her at 100 to 1. I'd bet her at 80 to 1. All numbers that you can find a bunch of different places. She took last week off to prepare for this. She's been a very steady player, someone that has shown even at a young age, they have the ability to kind of work their way through matches if they're struggling. She has a lot of talent. I like her spot in this draw, and it's just a huge number. So she's on my list. I'm going to continue to talk about her and bet on her as long as she continues to be priced like she's not very good.
Fair enough. And my value pick is something that I think we all kind of agreed on when we were going through there. A little bit of consensus around Krejcikova. I think she's the big winner from Sofia Kenin dropping out of the draw, pops into that 8 seed. Opposite half to Barty, same quarter as Sabalenka, and looks to be able to kind of build into her fortnight there. So as we said, unless Alexandrova or Muguruza or someone really redlines for a long period against her, I don't see if she can maintain that consistent level, then I think she will be there at the pointy end of the tournament. Unforced error-wise, Candace, who have you gone for as your unforced error?
I went with Bianca Andreescu, just not enough tennis. I mean, I guess it's not a surprise when I have her as the unforced error that's in that same quarter I was attacking there with Kostyuk, but I just haven't seen enough tennis from her. I feel like that's something we've reiterated all year long. Hope for the best, but not somebody I'm going to be working with at all.
Fair. I mean, I'm a little hurt because it's one of my outright picks from a couple of weeks ago, but it is also very, very fair. Alex, who have you gone for as your unforced error?
Jennifer Brady touched on this. One of my favorite players, was one of the better players on hard courts as close to earlier this year. I think she finished second at the Australian Open. If not, she made the semifinals. Just a really nice player. But as anyone that's ever had a foot injury, kind of any kind, let alone dealing with plantar fasciitis, which can be really painful at a moment's notice, and tend to gets worse as you're on it more, which is going to happen as the week progresses. She might come out, win a couple matches, look okay. The days off are going to really help her a lot, but it's going to be hard for her to recover and actually get better over the next 2 weeks. And I think as the tournament goes on, you'll see her struggle more and more if, again, she can even make it past the first week. So giving her a pass this week, unfortunately. Hope her foot gets better and she doesn't make it any worse, at least.
Yeah, that's a rough one. I actually get plantar fasciitis in my left foot when I run. I run with cute little compression socks, so I don't get it bad. But you're right. It's the recovery. Like when I'm actually running, it's not terrible, but it's like right after and throughout the night afterwards can be really rough.
And she needs to get herself right because she's got a lot of points to defend come the Australian Open at the start of next year as well. I will keep this very, very brief. So I think I've said enough about this player as my unforced error over the course of this season, which has been impressive because she was banned for half of it and then unbanned. My unforced error is Diana Yastremska. I'm interested to see what happens in round one. It's a hot, humid day forecast. She's got an experienced player across the other side of the net. And really the big question is, will it be a medical timeout in the first set or the second? And that's about where things really lie at the moment. So, look, she's going to need to find her way back into finding form, I think, on tour. She's played a couple of tournaments. And, look, she's looked solid, but she hasn't been spectacular. I'm happy to kind of go down a different path this week. But good luck to her back on tour. And it looked like she made a couple of friends last week in her match against McNally in terms of the crowd. And I'm sure she'll do the same at Flushing Meadows this week.
Always someone that making us want to cheer for her.
Alex, who is your overvalued player for the tournament? I think you may have touched on them a bit earlier.
I did. Was another choice possibly for unforced error, but Danielle Collins is being priced like she's healthy, and we know she's not. Again, I did have to look it up. The adductor is apparently a leg muscle, but any injury of any kind, especially with as close as she is to Sabalenka in the same quarter as Sabalenka and Krejcikova, at the numbers we're seeing for her, she's less than 20-1 some places, less than 25 even. I mean, I would need something in the 40s, almost 50s to really start to even think about backing her. So no value in her this week for me.
And Candice, who have you gone for as your overvalued player?
I went with Muguruza. I think she has a pretty tough draw. And I think when you compare her odds, I've seen her around 20, 22. I find that comparing her odds to someone like a Krejcikova or someone like an Azarenka, people who are really close to her in the draw, I would rather take either of those odds. Obviously, Azarenka is significantly longer than Muguruza. Krejcikova right there around just a touch shorter. To me, that's a really bad price, and I'd be looking elsewhere in her own section if that was a section you were looking to target.
Yeah, and it is a tricky little spot there, and I wish she did kind of match that form because she did look, she's shown some pretty impressive tennis at times, but it is hard to find that consistency with her. And my overvalued player, Naomi Osaka, I think she's going to be overvalued through the first week, and then she'll probably come back to kind of, her relative odds, I think, for the second week. As I said, she's a tough player to beat as she gets more confident and comfortable on the surface. She just hasn't played enough tennis for my liking to get involved at her price at the moment. As I said, I think she's a little bit too short in this round one, and it has a similar feel to her. She was challenged against Katie Boulter in the first match, I think, out of quarantine in Melbourne at the start of the year. I think she's going to take a bit of time to find her range. But if she does make it to the second week, I'm probably going to be keeping her safe in terms of outrights and maybe, backing her to cover the stake of some other players that I get involved with. So that is where I have settled on this particular part of the draw. And I think that's the tricky bit. I could have also put Sabalenka there, which means, they're both in the same half. You could make a case for a number of players there. And I got through an entire preview without mentioning Elise Mertens. I think I'm finally off that wagon.
Wow.
Attaboy.
What could go wrong? Alrighty, I think that just about does it. Any final thoughts on either the men's or the women's?
That's all I got.
We can add some things up on the Twitter page, Eat Sleep Tennis. If anything pops up, I guess the big thing, I guess, between now and the start of the tournament is we don't know where the qualifiers are placed. So that might change things a little bit potentially, but keep an eye out on the Twitter handle or our respective handles as well to make sure you catch all of our content and information over the next couple of weeks. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, follow on Twitter at Eat Sleep Tennis. We've got it running on Twitch as well, on YouTube. I don't know if Alex knows what Twitch is, so we'll just leave that away from him.
No way.
That's something teachers told me to stop doing when I was in grade school.
And we will. I'll pop this up as well for those who want to listen to it in the podcast form. So make sure you like, share, rate, subscribe there. And good luck to everyone for all of your bets over the course of the next fortnight. It should be an interesting period, probably more so for the women than the men. I think, as we've kind of touched on, we spend a lot more time on the women's draw than the men because there isn't one name dominating it as such. But as I said, if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch at Eat Sleep Tennis on Twitter. Otherwise, enjoy the fortnight of tennis, the last Grand Slam of the year.